Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next session, and welcome to our wonderful audience here on site at the ferry, as well as our digital audience who are tuning in. Just a quick reminder that at the end of the session, there will be some time for Q&As. Our digital audience will be able to submit their questions through slido.com. There will be through that code. And the audience on site, you can raise your hand and we'll bring it to you. Also, there will be a poll on slido.com at the beginning and throughout the middle of the session. Please keep refreshing the website so that you can participate in this poll. And with no further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce the next session, Where to Next? The Road to Clean Transport for All. Please give them a big round of applause.
Is this on? So the first thing that will drive you crazy is I hate standing behind a lectern. So I have a tendency to walk about. So apologies, it's going to keep the cameraman quite busy because he's going to be left and right. So anyway, welcome. This is the first time I've been here, so be gentle with me. Transport decarbonisation. So my name's Graham Cooper. I'm the head of future markets at National Grid. And I have responsibility, and it's quite daunting really, to make sure the energy system is ready for clean transport. And when we think about clean transport, most people leap to EVs, right? Because there are some outside, and we've seen some at COP. But my role covers road, rail, aviation, and maritime. So that's probably the rest of my entire career mapped out just to try and get through those, okay? So anyway, without too much ado, what I want to do is to make sure, have you guys all seen the Slido code? Because the more interaction you have through Slido, the more you get out of us, okay? So the dirtiest thing we did as a country, right the way up to about 2018, was make electricity. We burnt a lot of coal. Now, from 2018 into 2019, something changed. And that meant that transport became the dirtiest thing we do. Now, that's not because transport got dirtier. It's because making energy got cleaner. So if you've been to see Whiteley Wind Farm, that's energy being made cleanly. So 4 years ago, I worked for a wind farming company, and I was someone trying to plug into the grid. So I'm now the person in the grid trying to make sure the grid is ready for electric transport, because it wasn't quite that seamless trying to plug wind in. So the strange thing is actually happening here when you talk to transport people, because they talk purely to transport, normally the thing on 4 rubber tyres. But bearing in mind National Grid doesn't make electricity, we don't buy electricity, and we don't sell electricity. We are just the conduit from where it's made to where it's consumed, which means we see the things that are happening on both ends of our wires. And where most people think the move to electric cars means it's a problem for the grid, actually, decarbonising transport brings as many fixes to the problems they bring. So there's a symbiotic relationship being created, because if we do smart charging, we can charge cars, buses, coaches, when the grid is cleanest and cheapest. If there's a drop in wind, we can pause charging. So actually the thing on the one end of my wire actually means the market is better at the other end of my wire. Sorry, I'm going to make sure I cover all my bases here. And the exciting thing from our perspective is the energy system has been in a state of change already. So as I say, we've gone from being principally coal generated in the middle of the country with energy going out. We're now connecting things like offshore wind farms, so the energy's coming from the outside in. So it's a change for us, but we're already been in that change for nearly 20 years. So the change to decarbonising transport is just another change. And before I introduced the guest to the stage, things to remember. So transport is a change, but there are lots of things that are changing all simultaneously, like clean heat, clean transport, cleaning industry. So if you take away from this first section only 3 things, by 2050, we will consume twice the amount of electricity than we do today. To consume twice the amount of electricity we do today, you need 4 times the amount of clean generation. And to do 4 times the amount of clean generation, you need twice the grid capacity you have today. So that's not twice as many wires, that's more thicker wires. Those stats that I've given you come from the Committee on Climate Change, who advise government on policy. So they're not my words, they come from there. But what I'm really delighted to do is we've got 4 great people who I deeply respect for the things that they do, which are helping to shift the dial in this space. So this isn't about me, it's about them. I'm just the compare. So in a moment, I will invite the 4 of them up. Firstly, I'm going to invite Charlotte. Now, Charlotte is 15, and what I dearly love about what Charlotte's doing, and she will tell us more about this, but to give you some context, is so many people in dirty technologies want to blame the people doing the dirty, which means the connotation is negative. What I deeply respect Charlotte for is she praises people for doing the good thing. So the glass is half full mentality. And that is really important. She does far more, but have those core principles in your mind when she speaks to you. It's about praising the good rather than chastising the bad. There is a place for chastising the bad, but then the narration becomes much richer when praising the good. Then we're going to have the fabulous Kate. Now, Kate works for an amazing business that does really clever stuff to allow you to democratize energy. So we've had decades and decades where energy's done to us. We can now participate in it. And that's what Kate's going to talk to us about. Then Shaya is going to bring a bit of this is not just a UK-centric focus, right? Shaya's an ambassador for the organisation here. He is doing some really, really great stuff. And we'd not met, I've been following on social media, but we only met physically in a day. He's a great, great man and doing some great stuff. So I'm excited about what he's got to say. And then finally, when we move to Becky, all of this stuff takes money to do, right? And historically, we've had to save up to do something. Or we finance it, we borrow money. It's complicated. But what Becky's doing is, and her business is thinking about how will we make that transition? How do we make it affordable? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite the 4 of them up now. So first up, we have Charlotte. If you give her a small round of applause from the room. Then what I'd like to do is invite Kate up. So come and join me, grab a microphone. Then we have Shaya, who's coming up now. And then finally, we've got Becky, who's going to join us on the end. And I'm just going to point out one thing quickly. I appreciate in a lot of the discussions you may have seen around, particularly from the energy and the transport industry, generally they're white, middle-aged men in blue suits. I appreciate that I'm part of that problem. I'm a white, middle-aged man in a blue suit, right? But can we just make sure that whenever anybody's speaking at events, please can we make sure we have some gender diversity? Please can we make sure we have diversity everywhere? Because it drives me crazy when you go to events and all you get is white, middle-aged men in blue suits. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to change my page. So, I would need to click my slide, you see, that's where I've gone wrong. I'm sorry, the instruction says click slide. Here we go, that's me. Right, so I pointed out very early on that the dirtiest thing we do is move people and goods. Transport is actually the thing that will allow us to access democratization of energy. Kate's going to pick that up in a minute by doing the smart stuff. But at the moment, if we think about it, EVs, people get emotional about, right? You put your friends and family in, it gives you access to high days and holidays, right? Generally, electric cars are quite cool. People don't feel the same way about their boilers. You're a very special kind of person if you get excited about your boiler. But what we will learn through cleaning transport will actually help us learn how we clean heat, which is why we need to do good on transport, because it'll help inform heat. What I'm going to do here, I've talked about the symbiotic relationship, right? It is really important to understand this. Most people just say, we need a whole lot more energy, there isn't enough energy, it's a problem. But the other half of my job is I'm here to responsible to connect 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. 40 gigawatts of offshore wind, if you could ring fence it, pretty much would decarbonise surface transport in the UK. So the clean energy is going to be here ahead of the vehicles that are going to need that energy. So here's our panel: Charlotte, Kate, Shea and Becky. And this section is about move. So I'm going to try, I'm running over already, so I'm going to try and be very quickly. There is no magic bullet for where we charge vehicles, be that commercial vehicles or private vehicles. So it's a mosaic. There is not one size fits all, there is not one silver bullet. The important thing is charge at the right speed where it's convenient where the vehicle is. You don't need to own the vehicle, you can charge it at work if you don't have a driveway. The challenge here is this business model is changing, so we cannot assume that we just swap all the petrol vehicles for electrics. Yeah, crikey. I mean, the thing from my perspective is there are so many changes here. We need to learn from disruptive innovation, right? My electric car now is the first car I'll never ever own. I lease it, and it feels like transport as a service. So we need to look at those disruptors. Bundling. Mobile phones, you get the phone, you get the charging, you get the data, the text, insurance, all bundled as one. This is probably where we could consume vehicles in the future. So anyway, I'm going to move on quickly. I love this picture. I used this about 4 years ago. The change we're going through now has happened before. So if you look, New York, 5th Avenue, 1900, it's all horses. Well, it's not. Can you spot the car? It's somewhere here, right? Just 13 years later, New York, 5th Avenue, it's all cars. Well, no, it's not. There's one horse. Can I point it out? It's there, right? So this disruptive piece, people go, oh, we can't change this fast. We can't be too ambitious. We can't get there. It won't work. This has been done before. And interestingly, in the picture on the left, the emissions were smelly and up to your ankles, right? We've just moved the emissions to tailpipes from horses, right? But the other thing here is people often say to me, we are demonizing the car, and I've got a classic car in the car, and you're going to take it away from me. In the picture on the right, we have cars for transport. We haven't killed all the horses, right? Horses are now a hobby. So in the transition we're in, everybody will go through this transition in different ways. They'll live it in different ways. There's not a one-size-fits-all. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Charlotte. Are you feeling brave, Charlotte? These guys don't bite. So Charlotte doesn't have slides. Please introduce yourself and what you're doing.
Okay, yeah, I'm Charlotte. I'm a 15-year-old zero-emission children's health campaigner, and from the age of 11, I've been thanking zero-emission all-electric vehicle drivers with my EV thank you cards. So I came up with the idea of my children's health campaign when I was in year 5, around age 10, and I had to do a science paper on changes. So I decided I wanted to do my science paper on the change between ICE, internal combustion engine, and electric. And throughout this process, I not only learned a lot about electric vehicles in general, but also about the benefits that they have on children's health. Now at the time, this is 3-4 years ago, EV uptake was a lot less than it is today, and the charging infrastructure isn't as strong as it is now. So these electric vehicle drivers are truly pioneering. So I was thinking, well, little me was thinking, how can I possibly thank these EV drivers in a way that is completely open to everyone? It's not conflicting. It's super friendly, super nice. So I came up with my EV thank you cards. They looked a little bit different then. They've had a bit of an update, but the same thing. So it says, thank you for choosing an all-electric vehicle. You're helping children like myself to breathe easier and avoid long-term illnesses, such as stunted lung development, brain illnesses, cancer. Thank you. And at the time, it just said Charlotte, age 11, because I wanted to highlight that Charlotte could be any child, not just one child in particular, that it could be your granddaughter, your grandson, whoever, a child that's close to you, and you could relate to that, and it would mean even more. But now it says Charlotte, age 15, and it says EV thank you on my social medias, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. So from there, I've only gone further, traveling all the way from Oslo in Norway, through to California, Orange County, down San Francisco down to Orange County, and across the UK, including Northern Ireland.
So the nice thing here is that I was very lucky in that I have my own EV thank you. because Charlotte and I were at the Department of Transport and we were on a panel together judging car charging competition, I think.
In the Houses of Parliament.
In the Houses of Parliament, okay,
yeah.
so this is quite cool. And I treasure it. I actually have it in my own EV, and it's a badge of pride, if I'm being honest. The other thing from my perspective is there are different ways to campaign. You can bang placards, that's fine, right? You can go to social media, that's fine. You can hurl abuse if that's your style, that's fine. But the nice thing here is there is room and space for everybody to campaign for their challenges. And the one thing I feel particularly paternal for is my daughter's only a little older than Charlotte. And off the back of what Charlotte's doing, she's actually studying environmental science. So I think it's really important, and I really applaud what you're doing. So to some extent, we have our own Greta here in a very British style. So what I'm going to do, thank you, Charlotte, I'm going to move us on because we need to, as I've got a countdown here, because otherwise I could go all night, is we're going to activate our Slido poll. So you saw the Slido code early on. And what we want to do is you'll see on your Slido, we're asking you a couple of questions, really. So do you ever see yourself owning an EV? Yes, no, or not sure. And then eventually, if yes, do you see access to mobility as a service, more like streaming music? So look, I'm a dinosaur. I used to buy vinyl, and then I threw that away reluctantly and bought tapes, and then I threw that away and I bought mini discs, and I threw that away and bought CDs. And as a dinosaur, I now stream music. I finally got there. So in the same way, could we see that actually how we consume transport or mobility could go the same way? So hopefully those online, those in the room have done their Slido. How are we doing with, are you getting them to coming through? Is it working? As long as it's working, that's the most important thing. So anyway, there we go. So go on, I'm really intrigued because I'd like to know what this looks like, and then I'm going to, we'll talk about what this looks like. Go on.
Well, I'm happy to report we have a majority that will have intentions of owning an EV at some point.
Okay.
So 74% said yes, 11% said no, and there's 15% unsure if they ever see themselves owning an EV.
Fantastic. So I guess that, this I think is really interesting, right? So I'm from a generation that saved up and had to own something. So what I'm really interested from the panel is, what do you think? How will we consume transport going forward? I mean, Charlotte, do you ever believe that you'll have a driving license and own a car? Or are you in the boat which is, well, I'll never need it because it'll be autonomous and do its own thing?
That's a very interesting question. As I'm still 15, I'm not completely sure. Kind of depends where like EV adoption and autonomy, that's like a whole other subject, has gotten by the point I do think about if I want to drive or not. If I do, I'll probably learn how to drive an electric vehicle, of course. And hopefully, at some point in the future of my driving life, it will become autonomous, as that's the goal. One thing that I'm thinking after hearing the people that said no or maybe is I do have a YouTube series on my YouTube channel which is called Ice the EV, and it's a series where I hold the hand of petrol and diesel drivers, taking them from what is an EV, because first off, let's start with EV as an acronym, like not all people might know what that means. So starting from what is an EV all the way through to owning an electric vehicle. And so maybe linking to different ways of being able to make it less scary, make the process of going electric less scary by providing them with more information to questions that they may have that they haven't asked yet.
No, really good. So Kate, go on.
Yes, I don't know how far away from my face this should be.
Don't worry, we've got some really good sound guys, so hold it where you want to and they'll turn you up or down to make it
Excellent.
work. We're okay. We're amongst friends.
So I really love the idea of the autonomous model, but whereby it could be a subscription service. So you go onto an app, you request your car, it can be any EV that you like. It drives autonomously to your location. You then get in the car and drive it to wherever you want to go. And when you're done, it goes off to a centralized hub where it can plug in and continue charging. This way, we have got the benefits of the autonomous vehicles and reducing traffic jams and parking spaces, etc., needed on the public roads. They're continuously charging, and we only need to use the vehicle when we need to use it, but can also benefit from taking maximum benefits from public transport. That's where I see it going.
Okay, really good, really good. So I'm going to keep going along the line so you can see where this is going. So Shay, come on, what do you think? You know, do you own an EV? Do you ever see yourself owning an EV? What do you see as the future of mobility?
So,
Don't worry, just
okay,
you're all
can
good.
you hear me? Okay, good. Do I own an EV now? No. Do I plan to? Absolutely. And I think for someone like myself, where my current sort of situation is very different. I don't need a car every day because I live in London and I don't necessarily need one, right?
Yep.
However, taking on the journey and even experimenting with EV, I would love to do that. And I see myself subscribing to different models at the moment. Some, electric vehicle as a service, maybe a lease for a month, if I do really need it. So I would consider that for sure as an option.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really good, really good. Becky, if I could come to you.
Yeah, so this is all really interesting, and I think the future is going to be certainly along the lines of what Kate's talking about. So I see, you basically booking a vehicle, maybe actually you're incorporating other forms of mobility within your journey. So your electric vehicle autonomously is taking you, you skip between a vehicle to a train, walking the last distance, whatever. So it's combining different types of mobility, and definitely consuming that as a service. I think when you have the autonomous capability, it enables that to become a reality. And what you talked about as well, the integration with technology to be able to book via an app, it's definitely the future.
So, yeah, certainly. I mean, Shay, do you think this is a cliff edge or?
I think definitely this is the way things are going, and we've, I think, just spoken about one use case as individual, but there are other use cases where professional drivers, that Rider, Uber drivers or Bolt, those are the individuals on the road that actually cover a lot of mileage, but there are new different options for them to not even own a car but lease it through different options for much longer, and they have other incentives such as free charging.
Yep.
But I think the future really will be not just the fleet drivers, a commercial and individual, where car manufacturers would be responsible as part of a circular economy strategy to make sure that that we don't. They own the vehicle that we buy, but it's almost leased to us, because then it leaves them responsibility at the end of a useful life of that vehicle to be able to be taken back and recycled and repurposed. So I think we're currently at a stage where we do own vehicle or maybe consider leasing them, but ultimately for those that still want to own vehicle, it wouldn't be a full lifetime ownership. Ultimately, it would go back to the manufacturers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And interesting, as the energy guy in the room, right? The one thing I think is that we need in the system going forward is flexibility, right? So when the wind's blowing and the sun's shining, there's plenty. What if it's dark and the wind's not blowing, right? So it's really interesting for me. We see people pioneering vehicle to grid, and you kind of go, well, there's a battery on 4 rubber tires. But at the same time, when it's out and about, it's not actually useful for vehicle to grid. So it's one step. But what happens to the second life of the battery? I was with a car manufacturer the other day who shall remain nameless, and they were showing me one of their vehicles has done 320,000 miles, and the battery is still healthy. So actually, the car could get worn out before the battery does, right? And it blew my mind just a little bit. And then you're saying, well, hang on, if it's still a pretty healthy battery, what are you going to do? You're going to put it in another car? Well, the car technology may have moved on, but you could put it in a box in the cupboard under the stairs, or hang it in the garage, or stick it in the loft, and it could be connected to the grid and doing flexibility, more democratization of energy, right? And so I think it's one of those things, we're only limited by sort of the art of the possible, and we've all to sort of collaborate to work out what the answers are. The other thing I think is really quite interesting is the one thing that we've learned through COVID is we don't always have to travel. So I like the Department of Transport has this transport decarbonisation strategy. And the first sort of line is, don't travel. Do you need to travel? And then the second one is, well, actually, if you do have to travel, can it be active? So walking or cycling. That's a much better idea, 15-minute neighbourhoods. And that's fine for some, doesn't work for all. If you can't do active travel, can you do assisted travel? So, an electric scooter or an electrically supported bike. Well, then the next category is, well, if that doesn't work for you, then you ought to do public transport. But at least that should be clean. And if you can't do that, do shared. So, that sort of Uber dial-up model. And then finally, if you can't do any of those, own a vehicle, but at least make sure it's a clean one. So one of the things that I often get levelled at me, and I'd like to pick it up with you guys to see what your reflection is EVs are only for the wealthy, right? And I appreciate that the first of everything, right, is generally expensive. They get cheaper with time. But the thing, and this chimes to sort of Charlotte's point really, if my neighbour switches to an EV because I can't afford to, my air is better because of the choice they've made. So I think there's a piece here that even if you're not in the bracket to be able to get into an electric car now, or maybe you never will, but if everybody goes electric and your bus goes electric and the last mile delivery goes electric, we will all benefit from the air quality improvements and the climate improvements too. So how do we get to a point where we sort of normalise going to a clean vehicle?
Well, I have a couple of points to say, which some are not directly related to what
Go on,
you just
dive in.
said, but it's related to what has been
Yes.
said. So one on my ICE EV Guide series that I mentioned, I do actually mention that buying an electric vehicle, first-hand, yes, is quite expensive, and for most people that is inaccessible at the prices that they are being sold at. But for second-hand EVs, they can range from around £5,000, which is a decent price for most people when it comes to buying an electric vehicle. Considering electric vehicles, in comparison to combustion, they have generally less parts in them, meaning less servicing, meaning basically less things to go wrong. So that means even if this is like a 5-6-year-old Mark 1 Nissan Leaf that you have, and you're worried that's going to have issues, because it has so little parts in comparison to combustion, its upkeep will be so much cheaper, even as an old vehicle, in comparison to a combustion engine. So that's a point I wanted to bring up.
And that second-hand market is a really important one. So the one thing, often people, I don't work for government, right? National Grid is a private entity. Sometimes the government actually make clever decisions. So 57% of all new car sales in the UK are company purchases. So if you make it tax efficient for the person choosing the car, they'll choose electric, which is what we've got. But interestingly, the company car that's an expensive car today will become a second-hand car about half price in 3 years' time. It'll still have good battery health, it'll still be very reliable, but it will be half the price it was on day one. So there is something clever going on. So people say, oh, well, I can't afford an EV now. It's okay. This is not a cliff edge, it's a transition. But look at the percentage of EV sales that you're seeing now. Mark that month. 3 years from now, on the same month, that car will be hitting the second-hand market. And that's sort of pump priming. And I think that's really clever. I don't often applaud decisions from government, but that's actually one that I think helps fix the problem on affordability. Anyway, I'm conscious that the clock is ticking and we've got some lovely people who want to hear from you guys. So what I'm going to do is if I press this button, we should get Kate. Here we go. So
There we
Kate,
are.
I'm going to pass you the baton, which means it's your turn. I'm going to shut up.
Okay. This is big responsibility right now.
You can handle the responsibility. It's okay.
So my name's Kate Tyrell. I work for a company called My Energy, and it was with my new job that I got in September 2020 that really started my journey to electrification. It's been quite an interesting one. I live in Portsmouth, right on the very southern coast, as far south as you can go, and our office is in Grimsby. So I had to go and collect my wonderful Hyundai Kona, of which, you know, I'm incredibly privileged to have. It is a company car. There's no way I could have gone electric without the company providing it for me. So I'm very much aware that, you know, I'm in a privileged position. I picked up the car. It had 69% range on it, and I'm thinking, oh, I've got 250 miles to travel. It's going to be interesting. I was already aware of Zap Map and some of the other features and benefits that we can all use when we're out and about on the road, and I had a fantastic community on Twitter to help me along the way. So I plotted my journey. I knew I was going to stop at Watford Gap on my way home. I didn't realise that Ecotricity was going to be quite so slow when they started the electric highway. Years and years ago, they were absolutely pioneers, and wonderful infrastructure was put in place, but they neglected it a little bit. I had the worst charging experience, and I was quite vocal about it at the time. I ugly cried at the charger. I didn't know how long I was allowed to be plugged in for, how much it was going to cost, and I left with a measly 2% than I had pulled in. I put my concerns out onto Twitter, and everybody came back and said, oh, Kate, you can do this, that, and the other. And they were wonderful, really, really supportive. So, you know, that was great. The infrastructure has come a very long way over the last year. We've now got GridServe that have bought the electric highway, and they are doing some fantastic things. There are other businesses that are around and about in the EV sphere. So companies like Instavelt, Osprey, Ionity, absolutely wonderful. The oil and gas companies do also have their own infrastructure that you can use. It's just looking at reliability. So for the first 3 months of having the EV, I didn't have an at-home charger because I couldn't park on the drive. So I had to rely on public charge infrastructure. And I very quickly learned a few lessons. You absolutely need to plot your journey. You should know where you're going. You should know where you're going to stop and charge. And you learn how much you can trust your EV. So I know I can 100% trust my Kona. I know that when it tells me it's got 70 miles range, it absolutely means I've got 70 miles range. Range anxiety very quickly became something that I was no longer concerned about as I learned to trust the car and the infrastructure. And then I got my Zappy charger, which can use solar or wind energy to charge your car. So when we're thinking about the expense of charging your car, you can actually do it for free if you've got solar panels, which is fantastic. And the business that I work for, My Energy, we are all about creating energy independence, which means that you don't have to rely on the grid quite so much, and you can create your own grid under your roof. Sorry, Graham.
It's okay. There's a lot of love in the room. It's okay.
That's good. So yeah, you've got your base charge, which is your at-home charger, your en route charging, which is, you know, the electric highway or the public charge infrastructure as we have it, and then destination charging. So it's definitely come a long way. We're doing some fantastic things. I haven't used my clicker at all, have I? Here we go. Some amazing innovations are happening. We just saw this morning the government unveiled another charger that is going to be pushed out into the public.
Well, they're trying to create an iconic design, right? So,
I mean, it's iconic.
It is iconic.
It looks cool.
I think it looks very cool.
Functionality, though? What do you think?
I don't know. I think the jury's out. I want to use one. But isn't it funny? When the Routemaster bus came out, it was just a bus. But it's now an iconic bus. You know, the red telephone box was a functional device, and it's now become iconic. In the same way the black cab was designed just to be a transport device and has become iconic. So I think the interesting thing is they've designed something and run a competition to have a charge point that they're trying to second guess, will it become iconic? Yeah. The trouble is, you need time for something to become iconic. So is it successful as an iconic thing? Well, no, we won't know until we've got far enough in time to then look back and say, that was or wasn't iconic. So I think the jury's out. It's really interesting. We had a poll on LinkedIn, and it was actually split between the yes, no, or don't know.
I think I voted on that because I thought it looked cool, and I didn't realise that we were voting if it was going to be iconic. But like you say, it's not going to be iconic just yet. But the really great thing about this is it's bringing to everybody's attention that, yes, we know that 40% of the UK population will not be able to charge at home. So facilities such as this are going to really benefit people.
Yep.
When your average EV is about 200 miles of range and the UK average journey is 20 miles of range, we know that we can comfortably get away with just charging the cars once a week. So it's really talking to the public perception about what the reality is of driving an EV, how often you actually need to charge it, and then the vast array of the charging options that we now have available to us.
That's really good. I mean, the one thing is I'm interested really in time, how EVs just are normalised. So at the moment, we all get really excited that it's new and it's an EV and we, you know, how many kilowatt hours. But can I just reflect on something that's impacted us all that we've normalised? Because it was one thing that somebody pointed out to me and it actually really brought it home to roost. So everybody in the UK has actually helped peak evening demand, you know, the demand at the darkest time in the middle of the evening, by about 10%, which means we've all helped the grid get cleaner by 10% and used less energy by 10%, and that's brilliant. And then you look around the room and you go, so what is it? And people go, I don't know what I've done. It's the LED light bulb, right? So we've all done cleaner and greener, but we're all lit. So when people think about the journey to net zero and they go, oh, this is going to be really difficult, and I don't really want to do it, I'm going to live in a cave and I'm going to wear a loincloth and I'm just going to have to chew grass as my dinner and, you know, we're going to go back to the dark ages. Just reflect that you don't go into the DIY store and say, hello, could I have a climate-friendly, eco, really smart LED light bulb? You just say, can I have a bayonet fitting or a screw fitting, right? So we've normalised low energy lighting. I think it'll be interesting when we normalise EVs and charging, when somebody just says, I've got a blue one. They don't say, I've got this make or model or this many kilowatt hours. They just go, I like the colour.
Yeah.
And I think that will be really important, is where we normalise. So I'm conscious of time clicking and I'm being told to move on. So, Shaya, talk to me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you don't get a whole lot of fancy slides. It's all about you.
I just to pick up on just normalizing, I think one of the subtle ways, right, and you know, we all like some form of status, and I think social media has really helped in certain ways around things. So with EV vehicles now, at least the ones from at least last year, the license plate has a green sort of badge, right? And that indicates that this is an EV car, right? And if you think about it, I think in a way people start to feel like they're contributing and they're being recognized. And slowly I see that becoming some social norm and people feeling cool about it and, oh, I've got a green one, or what are you doing with it? Just plain thing, right? But just to speak to that around how, you know, people start adopting these new ways and social status around EV. But it's not just about EV, right? Or not just about EV cars, should I say? Because yes, as of last month, you know, the UK, you know, has about 340,000, you know, full electric vehicles on the road, you know, and about 600 plus thousand if you include plug-in hybrid. And that is great. We're on a good path. But we should also, when we're talking about sort of the bigger picture, right, beyond the UK, and realizing that this is a global crisis that we're all in, then we need to start thinking and widening our perspective around what other countries or what other geographies are doing around this. And some countries have different travel patterns and preferences, and it's not necessarily cars, right? So, you know, generally in the global south, mode of transport that some people use for public transport is like, you know, three-wheelers, rickshaws, or two-wheelers, and they are also on that journey where people are starting to do it. For example, in India, India's actually, you know, has about 1.5 million rickshaws, and every month at least 10,000 will be added. But 50% of that right now are electrified, right? So we need to also understand what is going on in other type of modes, and India is obviously leading at that. In another few years, by 2026, research shows that at least 80% of those rickshaws will be electrified. And that goes around how are they getting them, why are they doing that, and it's also not even policy driven. It's interesting enough. So in Europe has been very led by the adoption rate, has been led by sort of government policies, but in some other countries it's driven by individuals' savings and the mentality of wanting to see the benefit, right, of knowing that it costs to pay for fuel, and if they have an alternative. And many other countries are starting to think about this, even in certain countries in Africa, East Africa in particular, where startups are thinking around this same idea, around how can we, just go ahead, think about either local local manufacturing or assembly. How can we, for these two-wheelers or three-wheelers, and now there are stations that people can swap batteries. So if you own a three-wheeler, for example, you don't need to spend time at a fuel station anymore. It takes almost the same time you get to the battery hub, and you take one and you swap it back, right? So there's a lot of innovation going on around there as well. And I expect that there's something that we can all learn from each other globally. And I don't think there's a lot of that happening. It does cost a lot of money to put charging infrastructure, like billions of money, right? An investment, and not every country has that right now. But also, it's not just the priority for some. So in Africa, for example, more than 50% don't have access to electricity. So the conversation is not about electric vehicle, because I don't even have electricity at home to power my phone or study for my children. So the conversation then moves around what are the alternatives, how can they also be more efficient, not necessarily through electrification of vehicle, but also thinking about how can even energy be decarbonized through more cleaner sources, so through solar or using hydropower and other clean technologies. But on one angle, that's electric vehicle as a whole. Either you're on a four-wheelers or two or three, but right now there's also a lot of uptake with cycling and walking, and it's interesting because there's a lot of conversation around electric vehicles, and my background obviously transport planning and engineering, and if you spend time building cycle schemes or transit, you want then, and the conversation is about reducing congestion on the road. So there are debates and arguments around, okay, when we talk about EV a lot, are we unconsciously sort of getting people to think like they need to own one, right? And then I think we started with this conversation, right? And everyone said, yeah, they would love to. But then my question would be, do you really have to? Or do you support the idea of EV? Because there's, the most sustainable way, is still being, walking and cycling, if you can.
You're exactly right. I mean, if you think of the embedded carbon in making an electric car, if we just swap every petrol and diesel car for electric, we will have failed, right?
Yeah.
So I suspect, the manufacturers will make longer, better used cars, but we've sort of probably reached peak car.
Yeah.
Which is kind of strange in a way, because that's kind of how we've always been for the growth in the automotive market. But you're also absolutely right. There is no instruction manual to get to net zero. There is no instruction manual on how to decarbonise transport. So that shared learning, we mustn't be insular in that.
Yeah.
Now, I appreciate the interpretation of decarbonisation will be different in each country, but those fundamental principles need to be shared so we get the best answer. Because what we will also have failed at is there have been other disruptions.
Yeah.
If we don't learn from those mistakes, we will just be repeating the mistakes of other disruptions, because we're going to make enough new ones. Wouldn't it be foolish to recycle old mistakes? Oh, do you know what I mean? So I think there's definitely something there. But I also think, particularly Western societies, jump straight to the, I need to go somewhere, the answer's a car.
Yeah.
So even if we just pause for a second and say, I need to go somewhere, what's my choice?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the other one, I think, is back to the point on mobility. One of the most exciting things for me is if you put in, I go from here to there, what is my through ticketed choice? So I was talking to one of the big car hire companies, and they kind of go, well, I don't want to hire a car. And I'm like, it's the fundamental core of your business. What does your shareholder think of what you just said? And they went, no. What I want to do is through ticketing. So if you're sat at home and you say, I need to go to central London, well, the answer isn't hire a car because, well, where are you going to park it in central London?
Yeah.
So the whole principle is, I need to go from here to there. Now, I might walk to a bus stop, but then I have to find change for But if you've already got a through ticket, you just get on the bus. And that seamlessly lines you up with the train, that then seamlessly lines you up with an Uber or a mobile device or whatever, and you get to where you're going. Because actually, what you don't want to do is to say, I need a car or I need a motorbike or I need a bicycle. I just need to get to where I want to get to in a way I want to get there. So it'd be really interesting to see how even some of those with the really big thinking and how do we then, it's about mobility. So I'm really conscious that we're going to spectacularly sail past our time, and I'm going to get looks of evil from the team over here if I don't move on. I also want to give Becky the chance, because I know you're at the end of the line, but I'm really, really keen to hear how we go about this journey. So go on, make the magic work.
Yeah, definitely. So, God, there's so much to talk about, isn't there? And the themes are all, there's so many big ideas, and it's really exciting to be thinking about how we can use, net zero transport and mobility solutions in the future. And I think a key part of it is when you're thinking about, getting from A to B, you should think about it in that perspective, because that immediately opens up your options. And if we're talking in the sense of being climate conscious, then you might be able to make better choices. But I think it's crucial to have the education around it, to be understanding of what the different impacts are of the choices that you make. But also when it comes to adopting electric vehicles, education is everything, and not knowing what you're going to be using it for is almost the starting point. So yes, EVs are a big part of the future, and when you're thinking about transitioning to EVs, what you should be thinking about is things that we've already mentioned today. So what are your journeys? What do they look like? What's the average mileage that you might be doing? What kind of car do you need? So who are you transporting? And then asking yourself and doing some serious reflection about, okay, what's the infrastructure like in this area? What are the other options in terms of public transport? And then, like we've said, do you need to own a car, or is there another way? So once you've asked yourself all those questions, I think you gather a great deal of insight about your next step, and then you can move on to start to look at actually what are the solutions and in which ways can I access an electric vehicle if that is part of the answer. So traditionally, and I think this is where again it's sort of a behavioural shift. And because we're still seeing this in the car market today, there is a real lean towards ownership. If you want to own a car, that is absolutely fine. If you have the savings, then of course you can buy a car outright. But what we do at Volkswagen Financial Services is think about how we can aid affordability of EVs by spreading the cost effectively. So providing that finance, which means that people can budget monthly and make car, whether it's purchase or usership, part of their monthly outgoings. And often with finance options, you might be able to give yourself a little bit more flexibility. You might be able to add things like Charlotte mentioned around servicing. And it's just all important really to think about your own individual budget and therefore what's going to be the right option for you. So yeah, purchase, of course, you can there are finance purchase products available, but if you're less concerned about owning a vehicle and you'd rather have access to a vehicle for usership, and you are concerned about things like residual value or running costs, then actually potentially a leasing product, which you talked about, Graham, could be something that would be of interest, because you're effectively renting the vehicle, and then at the end of the contract you can hand that car back and move into your next EV. And what that means is then within, I suppose, the automotive ecosystem, that car is still owned and can be repurposed as a used vehicle for another consumer. So a bit of circular economy recycling going on there, I suppose. Other options we've talked about as well. Subscription, I think, is just taking off. It's in its infancy at the moment within this within the automotive industry, but it's really going to play a big role in the future, I think. But it is going to take a behavioural shift to get there, and this is where I think younger generations thinking more strategically about how they use cars and actually whether they need to own it will really drive that uptake, because yes, we probably don't always need to have a vehicle sat on our driveway, because how often do we actually use it? And there will be a high proportion of people in two-car households who probably don't need a second vehicle, you know, if they look at all of the facts together. So there's that, and then also if you're in a city, you have access to great public transport, and maybe once or twice a year you need a car, then good old car rental. You talked about that as well.
Yep.
That is always an option that's available. So there are plenty of options out there, and it's knowing what suits you, what suits your budget. It gives you the power really to make the right choice. In terms of, oh gosh, there's so much to talk about. You know, whole life costs, Charlotte's mentioned again about servicing, less moving parts inside an electric vehicle mean that actually there are some great savings to be made in the transition to EV, which I think helps to overcome that initial cost barrier up front when you're looking at the price of a new vehicle actually over the lifetime of the car. So we talk a lot about total cost of ownership and whole life costs. It's really compelling actually, the savings you make over the time you're using the car mean that they're actually not as expensive perhaps as you might initially think. And oh gosh, there is so much to talk about.
Yeah, there is. There is.
Yeah, we know how important that cost perception is for people as well, because about 63% of customers we've surveyed do look into that when they're looking at a new vehicle purchase. So we, as FS, are investing heavily in tools, digital toolkit to help people make those decisions. We've got an EV and Me app, and we've got an EV for Me online quiz, which gives you an indication of what your sort of financial savings could look like. And it's important to note that there are other financial benefits as well. So from a government perspective, the plug-in car grant is available. Now it's available on vehicles under the value of £35,000. And I think a lot of people might sniff at that and think, well, that doesn't leave me with much choice then. But what that reflects for me is actually that EVs are now becoming more accessible to the masses, because the amount of vehicles in the market under £35,000 has grown by about 50% in the last 2 years, and over half the vehicles in the market are eligible for the grant. So that is aiding affordability for the masses. And like you mentioned before, when these cars then become used vehicles, that's when there's going to be a tipping point in terms of affordability, because we know a third of our customers, a third of Brits that we surveyed said that they're waiting and that they think their next second-hand car will be an EV.
That's really interesting. I mean, that human behavioural bit that you've made a couple of mentions to human behaviour is really interesting, because we don't actually make rational decisions. You know, the ownership model today is you buy a very expensive product and it sits stationary for 97% of the time. So if you're following rationality, you wouldn't buy one, right? But in the same way, that human behaviour bit I find is really interesting. So 2,100 people every day run out of fuel. Wow. And we've had a lifetime with a needle and a light that says you need to put some more juice in. And we know how petrol stations work, right? So
Indeed.
That shows you that actually the biggest failure in the transition is humans, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I'm conscious of, because we could fill hours on this subject, I'm conscious that the very best thing we could do is probably open up Slido to questions. So I'm conscious that we've got an amazing team working on the Slido stuff. And I also think that there's an opportunity here, right, for you to ask the tough questions of some of the best people I know who are experts in their field in this subject. So there is no such thing as a bad question. We have somebody moderating the questions, but I'd honestly say I'm happy to have a go at any question that comes forward, because some of the best questions are the tough ones, and I'm quite happy to field the tough questions, because if I can't answer it, I'll explain why I can't answer it, all right? So I'm hoping that, don't worry, dinner's ready. Or is that Domino's arriving? No, it's fine. I'm sorry. It's a throwaway comment. It's a throwaway comment. So whilst we're waiting for some, have we got some good slider questions in yet? Go on then. Hit me with a good one, and then we'll work out who's best equipped to answer.
Perfect. So they've been coming in slowly throughout, and there's a number of them on batteries, the batteries for electric cars, and the environmental impact of extracting the metals. So one person asked here, how do we make the battery more sustainable, and the human rights behind it with the extraction of metals?
Can I really?
Yes, go
can
for
I
it.
go for this one?
This is not about me, it's about you guys. You're the subject experts. Go on.
In terms of the sustainability of the batteries, I couldn't possibly comment on that. But as an EV driver and someone who moves around in the space quite a lot, you do learn a few things. The mention of human rights, I'm assuming, is probably addressing the cobalt issue and this horrid myth that there are children out there mining for the cobalt that goes into our cars. Well, actually, that cobalt is used as a single-use raw material to remove the sulfurs from your diesel and petrol. There is more of that material in your mobile phone or your television than you would find in your car. So, yes, it's an awful, awful issue. It's a disgusting myth in the EV world.
Well, yeah, I think there's no smoke without fire in these discussions, right?
Yeah.
Oh, hang on, we can't say no smoke without fire as an environmental, hang on, we need to find a new analogy, right? But the one thing that you know is that when things start to scale, responsible businesses have shareholders that ask responsible questions of their business. So traceability of those materials is really important. But we've been consuming cobalt in a whole bunch, as you said. Up until fairly recently, more cobalt was used in the processing of petrol and diesel than it was in batteries. But we also see people moving away from cobalt. But also the most responsible thing we can do is not throw batteries away. So at the moment, when you're done with your mobile phone, it probably sits in your sock drawer. That's no good. If you have an old laptop, where is it? It's probably in the bottom of the cupboard with a battery still in it. Well, that's no good. So the one thing I'm encouraged by with EVs is people say, well, there's no way to recycle an EV battery. Yes, that's because batteries are lasting longer and there isn't a whole glut of them that need to be recycled. But I think we will see a tremendous growth in that reuse rather than single use. But it's also important to ask the difficult questions. But there is an element of don't let the facts get in the way of a good story that's good clickbait. Dig a little deeper. And I'm encouraged that actually most of the EV batteries now don't have, they're moving towards no cobalt. The cobalt is tiny now and almost none. Shaya.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I think the economics is very difficult. If you have to recycle, sometimes doesn't stack up. Hence why, it's more sometimes cheaper to just, make a new one. However, there is, this sort of path to use less of cobalt or even look for alternative. And I've been told even as to today that there are some exciting research going out there and some innovation that actually are free of cobalt and are in the works and are also equally powerful with better range. And so I look forward to seeing those. The only issue when you then think about an alternative mineral is it drives the demand and then increases the price because then there's more demand on that particular one. Again, that pushes on the cost of EV generally. But also I think on the environmental issue is when you're then mining new type of mineral, there are some unfortunate maybe implications there with impact on indigenous communities, maybe. And those are the things that we don't know yet, but it's important to make sure that when we're thinking about new alternative minerals for batteries, it's a very tough one, right? How do we scale completely, right?
I'm also a firm believer in there are always look for the unintended consequences, right? And the trouble is you look at the thing you're trying to fix. I'm conscious that we've got just less than 5 minutes to finish, and I'd like to get through a couple more questions. So sorry to cut you short, because I could listen to you all day. Go on, give us another good question.
We're back. I also want to just read out the second poll answers.
Oh, yes, go for it. So go on.
So the question was, if you answered yes to owning an EV at some point, do you see access to mobility as a service rather like streaming music through Spotify? And the answers were majority, 64% said yes, they could see it as a kind of a service. A quarter said not sure, and then only 14% said no. So that's very positive.
That is very positive.
Yeah.
So one of the things I'm interested in, and I know you work for Volkswagen Financial Services, and not actually making cars. I mean, you've got a spanner in your bag, I'm sure. But as a business, do you think the broader Volkswagen Group is going to make cars that are very more durable, high occupancy, high use, but almost shorter time duration because they'll have a harder life? I mean, do you see a world where if we're driven by car as a service, that high utilization could actually change the product that we know and love as a car today? Is that something you could see changing? I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I'm just intrigued because I'm an energy guy, not an automotive guy.
That's a difficult question to answer, I think, because it's so far in the future. It feels so far in the future right now. I'm not sure I personally have an answer to it, to be honest.
Well, no, that's okay. Not knowing an answer. I mean, we're not staring into a crystal ball here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just if you look at the speed of change to Spotify, or if you look at the change from Blockbuster to streaming, or to Netflix, you're kind of like, well, that was quite quick.
Yeah.
So I'm conscious that vehicles take quite a long time to design, right, and test and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it'd be interesting to see how that shift changes. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, but you're right.
Go on.
The different the car
Sorry.
types, all the segments that we see today, the SUVs, the hatchbacks. There might be a gradual shift depending on what mobility becomes.
Yes.
In terms of the utilization of it. Do they need to be multiple occupancy, bigger vehicles? That could really shift the whole design and the development of the market. But yeah.
So before Charlotte comes in here, do you know what I have in my mind? Is I'm old enough to remember the film Total Recall, and they had these autonomous cabs called Johnny Cabs, and it was kind of like a strange device, but you kind of go, that could actually be the sort of prelude to the future we could be moving into, I guess. Sorry, go on, Charlotte.
A thought that I think, both includes the polls question and autonomy, which we were talking about at the beginning of the talk, is that say if we were moving into the more autonomous space where transport and EVs particularly were seen as more of a service, and those people that still wanted to own a vehicle at the time, say an idea could be that they own this vehicle, but as you said, 97% of the time they either just sat on a drive or in a car park. These cars that they own could be semi-autonomous, so that they could be like, I want to drive this car out to this customer, a bit like an Uber, but it just Ubers itself there to where the person wants to take. So another person uses your vehicle to go to places, and you're also making money from it whilst you're at work or in the shops or wherever. Yeah. And so that's an idea that I think could be quite useful for the future of autonomy. And that's kind of my thoughts.
Like community sharing.
Yeah.
Well, it is. I mean, in a shared society, that you could see how that could really work. I mean, the thing we're just about out of time. The thing that I take away, right, from all of this is that if anybody in the room says, I know what the future looks like, I'm going to call you a liar, right? Because I don't think any of us really knows what the future is out there. But what I am convinced by our great panelists is that I'm excited by the future we could have, but I'm also excited by the ideas that have not yet been thought of. And this is why I'm really keen that, the organisation here is about prompting young people to have a voice, to have an opinion, to have ideas and to express those. And so I think there is no uniqueness in a good idea, right? So I think we are uncertain in the world we're going into, but you can either look at the future we head into as very worrying and glass half empty, or we can look forward to a glass that could be half full. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop at that point because I think it's not an unreasonable point to stop. I would like all of those in the room to please thank our panelists in the very retro and traditional way of bringing your hands together. So, Charlotte, Kate, Shaya, Becky, thank you. And thank you and the great questions. And we will be milling around just for a little bit if you want to actually ask us real questions in person like human beings. So thank you very much and good night.
Thank you, and thank you to this wonderful panel for this amazing session. Please stick around because there will be more evening events, and hope you have a lovely evening.